is why we do this, right? I'm going to give a little crash course on the region and the country. And then after that, I'm going to talk about a really important element in dealing with this population, which is trauma-informed care and secondary trauma. So if you all can imagine and picture the United States of America, the huge country that we live in, and you kind of take a look at Texas, right? We're looking at about an approximate size-wise, approximately the size of Texas is what Afghanistan will be, right? It's very small, but it's very diverse. It's a buffer state. So what a buffer state means is that it's landlocked by very, very big countries, right? It's in Central Asia. And the countries that surround Afghanistan are essentially, depending on where you live within those borders, will really determine the cultural influence, right? So if you're more on the Chinese border, your cuisine and your culture is going to reflect that of Eastern Asia. If you're more on the Iranian side, then your culture will reflect that of a Persian, right? A Persian feel to it. I really highly encourage that when you deal with this population, that you do not ask them, what is your ethnicity? I think it would be better to say something like, so what language do you prefer to speak in, right? Because I'm sure none of us would like it or appreciate it if somebody asked of us, what's your ethnicity? What's your background? It's fairly personal. If somebody opens up about it and talks about it, that's fine. But unfortunately, in this region of the world, ethnicity is used more to divide than it is to unite, right? Really, really important to keep in mind when you deal with this particular population that these folks have had, ethnic differences and issues and political issues, and a lot of that has had some civil resulted in civil unrest, right? So if you look at the key, you're going to see the brown area is what we call the Pashtuns, right? The Pashtuns are in the brown region, more so toward the south of the country. Then followed by the green, which is the Tajik, the yellow, which is Azawara, and the red, which is Uzbek. These are the four major ethnicities, and then the smaller ones are consisting of the Turkmen, the Nuristani, the Baluch, and the Pashai. Interesting fact, since Afghanistan has collapsed since August 15th, I have been on a leave of absence from my normal duties at Cornerstone and my normal duties with the translation. And really, I've had three goals. And the first one is to help people evacuate from Afghanistan. I have a No One Left Behind campaign that I'm a part of. I'm part of advocacy, but I'm also a frontline worker. I actually work at Fort Dix, New Jersey. Joint base. It's an Air Force base, and that's where it's the last open base at this point. And I have been working there since August to be able to deal with some of these issues that are happening on the base and to try to help people out from a cultural competent lens. So one of the things that I learned when I looked at these ethnicities and when I looked at these different characteristics of Afghans is that it's very hard to find interpreters that speak Nuristani dialects and Pashai, okay? Because these are such a small and rare dialect that we find it more difficult to be able to find this. It's a very rare languages and very rare dialects. So don't be surprised that if you're looking and you have some guests that are from this area and you're having trouble, that's normal, okay? And then at the end, I'll give you some contact information and feel free to use me as a resource to try to bridge some of those gaps between yourselves and whatever you're going through. I'm happy to offer myself as support. Okay, let's move on to the next one. This is my favorite. If you see this gentleman, his name is Qais Asad. He is a rabab fusion with pop, some type of really cool music. Excuse me for not knowing the exact genre, But he felt so passionate about this cause that he named his entire album after this. I am Afghan. Afghani is currency. I've read literature, I've read webinar titles, I've read emails, and I cringe. Afghani cultural competency, Afghani guests have arrived, Afghani. So there's a lot of that, and that is incorrect. We certainly do not want to walk around calling each other dollar bills, right? So an Afghan will probably not correct you. They will politely smile and bow their head. But really, in essence, we really want to make sure that we know that the correct way to address an Afghan or somebody from Afghanistan is an Afghan and not an Afghani, okay? So if you walk away from this with nothing else, then this, I will be very happy. So thank you for being mindful of that. So we'll move on to religions. Prior to this collapse, the name of this region was the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. And in the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, the majority is Islam. That's the religion that's followed. There's two sects, Sunni and Shia, and that is comparable to Catholicism and Protestantism, right? So, I grew up going to Catholic school, so it was very interesting to me that I was able to learn Catholicism and learn the different sects of Christianity. And in my mind, I always equate it this way. We also have a 2% population of Jews. We also have Hindus. We have Sikhs. And as a matter of fact, the Sikh community is very big on textile industry, importing and exporting, the very entrepreneur people in the country, in the region. Okay, so the two major languages in Afghanistan are Pashto and Dari, okay? And just to further confuse you, an Afghan Dari speaker will say, I speak Farsi. And this is super duper confusing because in another line of my work where I do legal interpretation and I'm in a courtroom and an individual comes in and they say that I speak Farsi, they get an Iranian interpreter, the interpreter comes in, they misinterpret, the person loses in court. It's happened too many times for my comfort, right? So I'm trying to get folks into the habit of calling it Dari so that there's a clear differentiation made when somebody's requesting an interpreter, but most likely Afghans will say Farsi, right? So please be mindful of that. And please do realize that when they're saying Farsi, they are not speaking about the Iranian dialect. They are indeed talking about Dari. It's a little confusing, but we'll circle back to it once we're at the end of this discussion. Some really fun diaspora statistics. There's an individual who sits on our board, the board of Afghan American Foundation. His name is Mustafa Bobak. He actually traveled from New York and he went all the way down the coast to California to do this really cool consensus of the Afghan American population. He started from New York, he went all the way down to California, and he came up with the fact that in California, the Afghan American population is about 127,000. And that's followed by Virginia, New York, and Texas. That's why on the military bases, when people are requesting locations to go to, they're asking for these locations. They're asking to go to Virginia. They're asking to go to, of course, California being the most popular, but Virginia, New York, and Texas. And we see kind of like an upcoming in North Carolina. Why California? Well, research shows that like the terrain, the climate, the feel, the community really makes people feel like it's Afghanistan. We're starting to see like a trend in Colorado as well, which is like a new thing now, that the mountainous region kind of makes people feel like they're back home. And there's a sense of comfort there, right? There's definitely comfort there. So let's talk a little bit about statuses. You guys are probably hearing a lot about SIVs, SIV. Some people call them SIV, some people call them SIVs. A SIV or an SIV is a special immigrant visa. Special immigrant visa recipients are only in two countries globally. One, in Afghanistan, and two, in Iraq, right? Not Iraq, but Iraq, right? So in Iraq and Afghanistan, people receive this visa because they are interpreters or they are translators. Interpreters transmit information verbally, and translators transmit information written. I had to make that differentiation because I do teach a course at Virginia Tech, Behavioral Health Interpretation. And another one of my pet peeves is that people often misuse the word translator, right? They kind of call everything a translator. But really, if two people are discussing something and you're transmitting this information, that's interpretation, right? So just a bonus point there. So the reason, same thing with the SIV population. In the last 20 years, special immigrant visa recipients have come to the United States because they've translated or interpreted for the United States military. And essentially what's happened is the highest benefits also for newcomers and arrivals were in California, we found. And lucrative incomes were found as well. A little trivia, Northern California, there's a place called Fremont. It has an area called Little Kabul. Great food. Check it out if you're ever in the area, right? And this map, you can kind of look at the numbers a little bit. Welcoming Afghans, right? Our favorite thing to do is drink green tea. We love green tea. If you've noticed, we don't really drink tea traditionally like other folks, right? We kind of have this thermos, and it's interesting because when I'm walking around and doing my rounds on the military base, I see people walking around with their thermoses, coming to get hot water, get the thermos filled with hot water, take it back to their room, and then they're good for the day. So we kind of brew the tea. We'll put a green tea bag inside of the thermos, throw a few pieces of cardamom in there, and it has a very pleasant fragrance, and it has a great taste, right? And if you're welcoming Afghans into your home or into your community, you want to make sure that you provide them with a hot halal meal. I say Afghan if you live in an Afghan area. I know other places might be difficult to obtain this, but really important to do this, especially if it's an Afghan area, because people are unfamiliar with the foods. And this kind of gives them the sense, again, of feeling understood, of like, wow, they really went out of their way to appreciate me, and they offered me food from my country, right? They're already going through a great deal of culture shock. So it's nice to see some familiar foods and cuisines and drinks and whatnot. So yeah, and so if something's unfamiliar, they may or may not be open to it. You know, they may kind of feel a little bit scared about like what's in that, right? Great. So something really important that I want you guys to be aware of also when you deal with this population is status and titles. Oftentimes in Afghanistan, since the society is collective, it's really hard. If you don't think like an Afghan, it's going to be hard to deal with this population because we're at the military base, we're sitting down, we're having a conversation, and a gentleman says, well, my family has been here for 14 days and we have 3 different flights booked. I want to be together with my family. So we take a look, we run his HB number, his hummingbird number, we run it through the system and we take a look and we say, why is this? Why is this the case? Well, when he's talking about his family, he's talking about his brother, his sister, his cousin, right? So his nuclear family is all going on the same flight. But to him, his family is all the people that lived with him back home. He lived with his mom, he lived with his sister, he lived with his brother, right? So that's a collective society. So you cannot really expect that folks are going to come over and that collective society lens is going to change overnight. It will take time to assimilate to this country, and the refugee curve is on average 1 to 3 years, sometimes more. It really depends on the person and the family, right? Remember that we're very individualistic in the United States. Me, I, me, my husband, my kids. And then that's kind of like how we look at things, right? So important to put yourself in their shoes for a moment. Separation anxiety, there's been a lot of that, a lot of separation anxiety, even from leaving the base to going to, I did some rounds. We had a hair salon set up that's run by Afghan guests. at the base, and one of the people who was leading it was leaving, and it was really emotional. She felt a sense of community within that safe haven for the last 6 months. And I see a lot of that. It's like people want to leave, but they don't want to leave, right? Because they're afraid of what's to come. Remember that. Polychronic versus monochronic. This is my favorite. We have like Afghan standard time. So if you tell somebody come at 5, they might show up at 6 or 7. So we've really been emphasizing the importance of punctuality and what time really means here. Time in Afghanistan is something very free-flowing and fluid. It's not that it's wrong. It's not that, we should frown upon it. It's just different, right? Things are much more fluid. Things are much more relaxed. It's a different society. So we really want to look at that and really respect that, right? And say, okay, I understand that in your culture, you may be having dinner at 9 o'clock and people might still be in your house till midnight, right? But here, if you don't pick up your child by 3 p.m., Child Protective Services will get involved, or the police will get involved, or whatever it is in your local municipality, right? So again, a lot of area for cultural orientation on our end. It's important for us to be culturally competent so we understand our guests, but also in the same token, it's important that we offer cultural orientation and teach. It's a learning experience on both ends. I'm sure you would all agree. Okay, here we go. PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. So PTSD is really a very normal reaction to something very abnormal. I'm sure you would not argue with me if I told you that, God forbid, if a missile fell in front of your face and you started screaming your head off, the missile falling in front of you is quite abnormal, but the reaction that you have to that missile falling in front of you is quite normal. I would say that it's quite abnormal if somebody just stood there stoically and just looked at it, right? So I think it's really important, unless that's how you deal with shock and then it'll come back later. But really, it's really important to understand, not all, but most of these folks have some type of form of PTSD. Now, before the PTSD was focused and concentrated on the war itself, right? It was like, okay, the regimes are constantly changing. There's feelings of mistrust. There's paranoia, right? There's all these types of feelings and thoughts. So it's really important to build a rapport with these folks, right? Now, the PTSD is coming from other things. Now we have other things such as, oh my goodness, am I going to have, from the time that I left my home until I got to Kabul airport, right? I saw people getting stampeded over. I was separated from my husband. I was separated from my wife. My wife and my children, I'll give you an example. I know people whose spouses and children were split in half. Like the wife and 2 children, like they had 4 kids, the wife and 2 children were able to get on the plane, but the husband and the 2 other children were not, right? So there is this post-traumatic stress disorder when you're sitting there at the base safe haven and saying, hey, I made it, but they didn't, right? This is a very real thing. And this is actually another layer of trauma that these folks have gone through. The trauma of getting here, period. Some people have gone from Kabul to Qatar, from Qatar to here. Some people have gone to Germany. Some people have gone to Albania, all of our safe havens and lily pads internationally. And going through this journey, a lot of things have happened. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. Just the last thing that I want to say about this before I move on is the importance of building a rapport. Yes, this is a patriarchal society, but in no shape, way, or form should we be ethnocentric. Not to say that anybody is, but I find myself doing this often. Women's rights and how come we can't talk to the wife, and how come we're only talking to the husband? Take a few steps back and talk yourself through it. If this husband is head of household and he's gone through hell and back, and he wants to be spoken to on behalf of his family, he wants to protect his family, right? He wants to feel it out and see, who are you? What is it that you need? And then once that rapport is built, yeah, okay, now you can talk to my wife. Now you can talk to my kids. Ease into this. Ease into it, because people are hurting and people have gone through a lot. I would strongly encourage everybody to ease into whatever they're going through. People are edgy, they're agitated, they're frustrated. They have families that are left behind in Afghanistan. I spoke to a gentleman one day. I was in a town hall, and we were sitting in the town hall, and the town hall was ending, and he was adorable, this little old man, and he was crying. So when the town hall was over, I approached him and I asked him why he was crying. And he said, I was at the airport, myself, my wife, and my children, and I got on the plane and they were left behind. So I appreciate that you guys are giving me 3 meals a day, but I can't stomach any of those meals because I don't know what my family's eating. I don't know that they're getting 3 meals a day, right? So there's definitely that survivor's guilt, the added layer, right? To add to everything else, there's survivor's guilt. I survived, but they didn't, or I made it out and they didn't, right? So important to think about that and really internalize that. Understanding cultural nuances in Afghan cultures, gender relations, do's and don'ts. Well, I can probably spend an entire segment on this, but just very basics. If you're a male and you're dealing with a female, or a female dealing with a male, the safest and best practice, take your right hand, put it over your heart, slightly bow, salam, peace. That's it. If you're not sure about the whole handshake thing, sometimes people extend their hand out to me all the time on the base, and I will, re-extend. I will not insult them. But sometimes they don't. Just to be sure, you just do this, and then they do it back, and we're all safe. We will kind of given people the respect and space, and we're good to go. Understanding these nuances really is a very involved process. But being as respect is a huge thing in our culture, so really important to remember that respect is huge. Remember that Afghanistan, although most people don't know this, is the land of Rumi. Afghanistan is a land of poetry and music and Sufism. Rumi is really Jalaluddin Balkhi, born in Afghanistan in the province of Balkh, right? And he's such a popular guy. And, we have his quotes and his pictures. Remember that he's an Afghan man at the end of the day. And it's important to learn about the culture to really understand all that it's entailed and not rely solely on Western media. Some issues that we have been dealing with on base. This is the reason why I share some of the stuff that's happening on the base is because these folks are going to come off the base and into your hands, right? There's a lot of pregnancies. I feel like every other person on the base is pregnant. Okay. There's a lot of miscarriages. A lot of people losing their babies because of the trauma and the stress. Okay. Unfortunately, a lot of stillborns I've had to deal with myself personally. A lot of postpartum stress. And the emotional support is lacking when it comes to maternal issues. When they're back home and their mom is there and their grandma's there and their aunt is there and their cousins are there, they have that emotional support, right? But here they don't speak the language. They don't understand the culture. They're still in a state of shock for everything they had to leave behind. So we find that maternity issues are something to really keep an eye out on. So if you know some of your clients that are pregnant or have very recently given birth, pay attention to that and remember and know that, right? Right. Before I go on, I forgot to tell you guys that my background is Kabul city in which I am from both sides of my family. It's just the capital. It's mountainous, it's beautiful, and then the flag is over here to the left. Okay. The challenges, like I said, of the new arrivals is there's definitely disparities when it comes to language access. right? There's definitely this fear of what's going to happen to my child in this country. There's a lot of taboos and stigmas that are attached to even the delivery process, right? There might be some different rituals that people do that are not necessarily the same as here, right? We have like a 40-day period, 6 weeks, certain things that go on. Making sure that these women get female staff when they're giving birth. It's really important for the OBGYN to be female, or the midwife to be female, or the nurses. This is a very intimate and personal journey. So female staff is really important. And of course, trauma-informed care. If they haven't had the proper prenatal care post this time, it's really important to make sure that they're prepared. Most of these folks that I've met are high-risk pregnancies, meaning that, there is a strong possibility of stillborn, and there is a strong possibility of losing their children. All right. If you take a look at my screen, you're going to see this quote, and it says that the expectation that we can be immersed in suffering and loss daily and not be touched by it is as unrealistic as expecting to be able to walk through water without getting wet, right? There is not one person on this call who's dealt with a single client or a single family that has not gone through this. I refuse to believe it, right? Unless you can walk through water without getting wet, then you definitely want to let me know, because I would need you to be on my side with your with miracles, right? That you're able to perform. I'm just kidding, just some silly humor, because it's getting kind of heavy. But everybody is dealing with trauma. The military is going through trauma. They have so much love and mercy when they're dealing with the children. And now, as we're drawing down, we have even more trauma, because now we've attached and formed bonds with these folks and these families. And now they're leaving, right? So the base is becoming more and more empty. Normally you walk around the villages and the children are playing, and they're playing volleyball with the soldiers, or they're kicking around a ball, or they're asking for candy. All of us, we walk around with pockets full of candy, not artillery, no guns, no weapons. Everybody has pockets full of candy. So, we don't really have that much, candy to give out anymore, because there's no more kids. So I think all of this really affects us. And when a person, especially interpreters and translators, if you know them, reach out to them, because they should be interpreting in third person. They say, I. After a while, the story becomes yours. You keep saying, I. After a while, it's your story, right? Or for me in particular, I have been really dealing with, DV, domestic violence, and a lot of child protective services, sexual assault. You go home with that. I have also gone through my length of time of secondary trauma, and it's really real. It's really, really important. Obviously the direct trauma is what the person goes through, but indirect is what we all go through, right? We all experience this through these people's lens, right? And, there's a lot of different things that can happen to folks, but something that I want to highly encourage to all of you on this call is it's just as important for me to talk to you than it is, yes, it's important to understand, but the key word here, right, that Dustin put out was cross-cultural. That means that we're all being affected by this. We're all needing to understand this. We're all needing to consider each other and hold each other's hands through this. Reach out to your Afghan American counterparts that are going through this, because I can tell you, for us, one of my colleagues said it the other day, it was an aha moment for me. My colleague said to me, "This is like another 9/11." And I just looked at him and I was like, wow, it is. It is. I'm aging myself, but I was an adult when 9/11 happened. And I remember every moment of it as a New Yorker and as an Afghan American. But he was right. He was right. In a lot of ways, now, before 9/11, A, B, and C happened in my life, now it's before August 15th. Everything's a big blur, right? There is multiple layers of trauma. Not to say that, anybody else's pain is any less. Of course not. I mean, I've spoken to attorneys that are going through trauma that have to keep hearing these stories over and over again. I've spoken to caseworkers. I've spoken to interpreters. I mean, everybody's going through it. But there's something to be said about the Afghan American folks that essentially are experiencing a lot of survivor's guilt. My best advice to you folks would be to hold each other's hands, call each other. Not everybody's going to go to therapy. Therapy is great, right? But not everybody's going to do that. So if I'm hurting, I'm going to call Dustin and say, hey, Dustin, yesterday, this is what happened in the office. Do you feel like that? And Dustin's going to say, you know what? I had a moment like that last week. And you just talk it out. You just need to get it out, air it out, And you need to put it in a compartment in your mind to say, this trauma is going to stay. It's like a picture. Imagine a photo album. It's a picture. These things are coming in pictures. You're going to look at the picture. You're going to process the picture, and then you're going to put it back in the album and close it. Right? It's sad and it's heartbreaking, but it's not yours to own. Right? If you want to be able to do a good job at what you're doing, there comes a point when you have to let it go. And if you don't, which I see very often, you're going to burn out and you're going to have to walk away for quite some time. And I encourage you that if you feel like you've become too attached or too involved, where it comes between a line between professionalism and personal, then I ask you to walk away from it for a while, right? Until you can reset and come back and do things for yourself that you enjoy and don't feel guilty about it. I hope that resonates with some of y'all. Okay, learn about Afghanistan resources through Afghans themselves. Read Afghan literature that is written by my good friend, Dr. Nadia Hashimi. She sits on the board of the Afghan American Foundation with me. She's got great books. They're fiction books that take place right here in the US, but they're so, so good. Dr. Zora Saeed, another one of my great friends. She's a poet and a professor. Pick up her Afghan American anthology. We all know Dr. Khalid Husseini, kite runner, and Jamal Jana Kochai. These are great people to read and learn from. Lastly, I will be putting this link. I will give it to Dustin. He can give it